The lights of St. John's Mercy Hospital twinkled against the dark sky of New Orleans. The humid heat of Louisiana penetrated through the windows of the old building, even with the air conditioning running non-stop. In the quiet wards, patients slept restlessly, as if something invisible disturbed their dreams. Laura Olson, head nurse for 15 years, hurried down the corridor of the pediatric intensive care unit. Her tired eyes observed the monitors of the small patients. Upon reaching the last bed, her heart tightened in her chest. Isabella Sanders, a girl of only 6 years, was connected to so many tubes and machines that her pale little face was barely visible. "How is she?" asked Andrea, the girl's mother, who hadn't left her daughter's side since the mysterious illness had manifested 3 months ago. "Stable, but still very fragile," Laura replied, checking the vital signs. "Where's your husband?" "Jason is still in the ICU. No improvement." Andrea wiped away the tears that insisted on falling. "Our world collapsed in such a short time. First his accident, then Isabella's illness." Laura squeezed Andrea's shoulders in a gesture of solidarity. The Sanders case moved the entire staff. Jason, a riding instructor, had suffered a serious accident during a lesson and had been in a coma for weeks. As if the tragedy wasn't enough, his only daughter had mysteriously fallen ill shortly after, and no examination could diagnose what was consuming her day by day. "Dr. Coleman wants to talk to you early tomorrow," Laura said softly. "Try to rest a bit. Can I bring you some tea?" "No, thank you." "I can't swallow anything," Andrea replied, not taking her eyes off her daughter. When Laura left the room, she found Dr. Alexander Coleman reviewing charts at the nursing station. At 35, he was already considered one of the best pediatricians in the South, but Isabella's case left him visibly frustrated. "Did the results of the new test arrive?" she asked. "Yes, and we still have no answers," he replied, running a hand through his dark hair. "Tomorrow I'll have to discuss with Andrea about palliative options." Laura felt a lump in her throat. They both knew what that meant. "There must be something we can do." "Scientifically? No. We've exhausted all possibilities," he closed the chart with a heavy sigh. "It's in moments like these that I question all my medical training." The clock marked 2:37 in the morning when Laura began her night rounds. The hospital acquired a different aura during the night. The empty corridors amplified every sound, shadows seemed to move in the corners, and time seemed to drag on. As she passed the window overlooking the inner courtyard. Something caught her attention. A white reflection, too large to be a cat or any common animal. She rubbed her eyes, attributing the vision to the fatigue of so many sleepless nights. That's when she heard it. A peculiar and impossible sound, the clinking of hooves against the linoleum floor of the corridor. Laura froze, with the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The sound became closer, more defined. She turned slowly, and her jaw dropped. There in the hospital corridor was a completely white buffalo, immense and majestic. Its deep blue eyes stared at Laura with disturbing intelligence. The animal moved with surreal grace, contradicting its colossal size. "Impossible," Laura murmured, feeling her legs weaken. The buffalo proceeded down the corridor as if it knew the way. With horror and fascination, Laura followed at a distance. The animal stopped exactly at the door of Isabella's room, where Andrea had finally fallen asleep in an uncomfortable armchair. When the buffalo walked through the door without opening, it as if made of mist, Laura was sure she was hallucinating. She ran to the room and opened the door silently. Inside, the impossible continued to happen. The white buffalo was beside Isabella's bed, its muzzle almost touching the girl's face. The monitors began to register changes. Her heartbeat increased. Oxygenation suddenly improved. And as Laura watched, paralyzed, Isabella's face acquired a rosy coloration it hadn't had for months. At the same time, somewhere in the hospital, a cardiac monitor emitted the unmistakable sound of a flat line. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll continue. Morning arrived with unusual agitation at St. John's Mercy Hospital. Nurses ran through the corridors, doctors discussed in low voices, and rumors spread like wildfire. Two inexplicable events had occurred during the night: the sudden improvement in Isabella Sanders' condition, and at the same time the unexpected passing of Mr. Albert Reynolds, an elderly man who was recovering from simple surgery and was about to be discharged. Laura remained silent about what she had witnessed. Who would believe that a spectral white buffalo had visited the hospital in the dead of night? She herself doubted her sanity, but the monitors didn't lie. Isabella showed vital signs she hadn't seen in months. Dr. Coleman examined the girl with barely disguised amazement. "It's inexplicable," he murmured while checking Isabella's pupils, which responded normally to light. "Yesterday we were considering palliative care, and today—" "It's a miracle," exclaimed Andrea, with tears in her eyes. "My daughter is coming back to me." While the mother and doctor talked, Isabella opened her eyes for the first time in weeks. Her gaze seemed different, deeper, older, as if it didn't belong to a 6-year-old child. "Mommy," she called with a weak but clear voice, "I saw a white buffalo. He said he's going to heal me." Andrea and Dr. Coleman exchanged concerned looks. "It's just her imagination, an effect of the medication," the doctor tried to reassure the mother. Laura, who was organizing medications near the bed, felt a shiver run down her spine. How could the girl know? "Isabella, did you dream about this buffalo?" Laura asked carefully. The girl shook her head. "It wasn't a dream. He's real. He has blue eyes and came to help me." Then, with disconcerting seriousness, she added, "He said he wants to talk to Daddy." Andrea paled. "But your father is in a coma, honey." "Not for much longer," Isabella replied with frightening conviction. At that very moment, the intercom of the ward rang. It was from the adult ICU, reporting that Jason Sanders was showing signs of increased brain activity. Dr. Coleman ran out toward the ICU, leaving Laura with a stunned Andrea and a strangely serene Isabella. "How did you know, sweetheart?" asked Andrea with a trembling voice. "The buffalo told me," Isabella answered simply. "He makes trades, Mummy. He gives and takes." In the adult ICU, neurosurgeon Dr. Gabriel Davis observed Jason's recent exams with incredulity. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this," he commented to Dr. Coleman, who had just arrived breathless. The pattern of brainwaves changed completely in a matter of hours. "It's as if something had reactivated his brain." "It's the same thing that happened to his daughter," replied Alexander, sharing the data about Isabella. "Two miraculous recoveries in the same family, on the same night. And at the same time we lost 2 stable patients during the night," added Gabriel with a grave expression. "Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Marlene Wilson from the cardiology ward, both without any prior sign of complication." Alexander frowned. "Strange. Coincidence?" "In medicine, I've learned to be suspicious of coincidences," replied Gabriel, adjusting his thick-framed glasses. At 65, he was the most experienced and respected doctor in the hospital, known as much for his competence as for his interest in unexplained medical phenomena. "Something is happening here that our spreadsheets and machines cannot measure, Alexander." Before they could continue the conversation, a monitor began to beep. Jason Sanders was opening his eyes. The doctors rushed to the bedside, where Jason blinked in disorientation, trying to adapt to the light. When he finally focused on the 2 men in front of him, his first words left them perplexed. "Where is the white buffalo?" Dr. Davis and Dr. Coleman exchanged alarmed looks. "Mr. Sanders, do you know where you are?" asked Gabriel, initiating the standard protocol to evaluate patients who awaken from a coma. "St. John's Mercy Hospital," Jason answered with surprising clarity. "I've been in a coma after falling from a horse, I know that. But I need to know, where is the white buffalo that brought me back?" "There was no animal here, Mr. Sanders," replied Alexander cautiously. "You must have been dreaming during the coma." Jason tried to sit up, but was restrained by the doctors. "It wasn't a dream," he exclaimed with his eyes wide with urgency. "The guardian of balance was here, and if he came, it means that—" His voice failed, taken by sudden dread. "My daughter. How is Isabella?" Surprisingly, she showed a remarkable improvement overnight, informed Alexander, almost as inexplicable as your own awakening. Jason's face contorted into an expression of horror. No, no, no. This shouldn't happen. He shouldn't interfere. He grabbed Alexander's arm with unusual strength for someone just out of a coma. Doctor, you don't understand. When the white buffalo appears, it always demands a price, a trade, a balance. Dr. Davis approached, suddenly interested. What kind of trade, Mr. Sanders? Jason looked at the two doctors with eyes brimming with tears. Life for life, Doctor. The guardian of balance cannot save without sacrificing. The next afternoon, Isabella's room transformed into the epicenter of an unusual meeting. Dr. Davis, intrigued by Jason's words, requested a conversation with the Sanders family. Dr. Coleman and Laura were also present, driven by scientific curiosity and astonishment at recent events. Jason, still in a wheelchair due to muscle weakness after the prolonged coma, held Isabella's hand, who seemed to bloom with each hour. Andrea remained between her husband and daughter, like a fragile bridge between two miracles she couldn't understand. Mr. Sanders, I need you to tell us more about this. Guardian of balance, asked Dr. Davis, adjusting the recorder he had brought with the family's permission. It may seem irrelevant to conventional medicine, but after 50 years in the profession, I've learned that science still crawls in the face of certain mysteries. Jason inhaled deeply as if organizing old memories. It's a story that spans generations in my family. My maternal grandmother, Hope, was descended from an ancient Native American tribe from the Louisiana bayous. According to her, our ancestors were guardians of a natural temple, where the spirit of universal balance dwelled, manifesting in the form of a white buffalo. A buffalo isn't native to Louisiana, observed Dr. Coleman skeptically. It's not a common animal, retorted Jason. It's a spiritual manifestation that assumes the most appropriate form for each era. In the past, according to my grandmother, it appeared as a white mountain lion. Now, it's a buffalo. Laura felt a chill as she remembered the deep blue eyes of the animal she had seen the night before. Please continue, encouraged Dr. Davis. When someone from our lineage is about to depart prematurely, the guardian may intervene. It happened with my great-grandmother, who survived a serious fever as a child. It happened with my mother, who miraculously recovered from poisoning at the age of 12. And now, his voice faltered as he looked at Isabella. Now he came. For me, Daddy, completed Isabella with a disturbing maturity. I saw him, he spoke to me. The room fell silent. The clarity and conviction in the girl's voice were disconcerting. What did he say, honey? Asked Andrea, hesitant. He said he's going to heal me, but that someone will have to go in my place. It's like a scale, explained Isabella, making a balancing gesture with her small hands. And he said that this time is different, because Daddy called him first. All eyes turned to Jason, who paled. I dreamed of him while I was in a coma, he admitted. I begged him to save my daughter, to take me in her place if necessary. And now both of you are recovering, noted Dr. Davis, thoughtful. But according to your family tradition, whenever the guardian saves a life, another goes, confirmed Jason. It's the natural balance. Life and death are two sides of the same coin. Dr. Coleman consulted his tablet. On the night when both of you showed improvement, we lost 2 stable patients. Since then, we've had 3 more cases of patients who suddenly deteriorated, without medical explanation. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implication was too frightening to be verbalized. This doesn't make sense, protested Andrea, standing up. Are you suggesting that my family's recovery is causing the departure of other people? It's absurd. I'm Catholic. This sounds like... She hesitated, unable to say the word witchcraft in front of her daughter. I'm not suggesting anything, Mrs. Sanders, replied Dr. Coleman diplomatically, just noting statistically improbable coincidences. They're not coincidences, interrupted Isabella, drawing everyone's attention. The buffalo said the balance is disturbed, because 2 were saved when only 1 should have been. Now he needs more compensation. The word, so adult in the mouth of a 6-year-old child, caused a collective Shiver. How can she know these things? Whispered Andrea to Jason. We never told her these stories. Jason shook his head as perplexed as his wife. The Guardian must be communicating directly with her. This is fascinating, murmured Dr. Davis, genuinely intrigued. From his bag, he pulled out an old book, bound in dark leather. I brought this from my personal collection. It's a compendium of unexplained phenomena recorded in hospitals around the world. There are several accounts of spiritual figures appearing before major changes in patients' health. Laura, who had been silent, finally gathered courage to speak. I saw it, she confessed, making everyone stare at her. The night before last, I saw a huge white buffalo in the pediatric corridor. It entered Isabella's room, passing through the door as if made of mist. I thought I was hallucinating due to fatigue, but— You saw him? Exclaimed Isabella, her eyes shining. He let you see him. That means you're special. Or that I've been working too many consecutive hours, countered Laura, trying to revive her skepticism. No, insisted Isabella. He chooses who can see him, and he chose you because he'll need your help. Dr. Coleman rolled his eyes, his scientific patience running out. This is going too far. We are healthcare professionals, not ghost hunters. I agree that the recoveries are extraordinary, but— At that moment, the lights in the room flickered 3 times, and an unexplainable breeze stirred the curtains despite the windows being closed. He's here, whispered Isabella with a serene smile. Now you'll understand. The week that followed was marked by sharp contrasts at St. John's Mercy Hospital. While Isabella and Jason presented recoveries that bordered on the miraculous, other patients inexplicably succumbed. The pediatric ward, in particular, had become the stage for a macabre dance between sudden improvements and unexpected deteriorations. Dr. Coleman, despite his initial skepticism, could no longer ignore the pattern. He met with the medical team in an isolated conference room, away from the ears of patients and family members. 7 patients have deteriorated without explanation in the last 5 days, he reported, projecting graphs on the screen. All were showing stable conditions or recovery, before suffering abrupt declines. In parallel, Isabella Sanders, who was terminal, now plays in the corridors as if she had never been ill. And her tests? Questioned an oncologist. Clean, completely clean, replied Alexander, running a hand over his exhausted face. It's as if the disease had simply evaporated. Coincidences happen in medicine, argued a cardiac surgeon. We've seen terminal patients recover before. 1 or 2, perhaps, countered Alexander, but a terminal child recovering in days, while 7 stable patients deteriorate simultaneously. The statistical probabilities are astronomical. Dr. Davis, who had been leafing through his notebook, cleared his throat to call attention. There's another factor I need to share with you. 3 nurses reported nighttime sightings of a large white animal in the corridors. A murmur ran through the room, mixing nervous laughter and expressions of incredulity. Please, Gabriel, protested the clinical director, Dr. Helena Morgan. We have enough problems without adding supernatural stories. I'm not talking about ghosts, Helena, replied Gabriel calmly. I'm talking about a phenomenon witnessed by multiple professionals in different wards and shifts. Nurse Laura was the first, followed by technician Marcy and Nurse Roger. All descriptions are identical. A huge white buffalo with blue eyes that appears and disappears without leaving traces. The silence that followed was laden with tension. No one wanted to be the first to validate or ridicule that information. We've installed additional cameras in the corridors, informed Dr. Morgan finally. If there's something wandering through the hospital at night, we'll document it. Meanwhile, I suggest we focus on scientific explanations. After the meeting, Laura found Dr. Davis in the corridor. Thank you for defending me in there, she said. I know I risk becoming the hospital joke, but I know what I saw. I believe you, replied Gabriel, and I'm not alone. He led Laura to a small room at the back of the medical library, a space that few knew about. The walls were lined with old books and shelves with curious artifacts. What is all this? Asked Laura, amazed. My private collection, explained Gabriel. I've spent 50 years documenting cases that defy conventional medicine. He pulled out a volume bound in blue leather. This one is especially relevant now. The book, written in archaic English, recounted cases of guardian entities that intervened in critical health moments, always demanding balance between life and departure. This sounds exactly like what Jason described, observed Laura. Precisely, agreed Gabriel. And most intriguing, one of the documented cases occurred in this very hospital in 1897, involving an ancestor of the Sanders family. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. What happened? A child of the family fell gravely ill. The guardian, described then as a white mountain lion, appeared and healed her. In return, 3 other patients inexplicably passed away. Laura frowned. But this time, we've already lost 7 patients, and others are getting worse. Exactly, agreed Gabriel with a grave expression. The balance is out of control. 2 Sanders were saved, Jason and Isabella. The guardian is demanding a greater price. In Isabella's room, a scene of apparent normalcy hid deep tensions. The girl, with rosy cheeks and renewed energy, was drawing sitting on her bed. Jason observed his daughter with a mixture of joy and apprehension, while Andrea organized clothes for the hospital discharge, scheduled for the next day. "Look what I drew, Daddy," said Isabella, holding up the colored paper. Jason felt his blood freeze in his veins. The drawing showed the white buffalo surrounded by small crosses, 7 of them colored black and another 5 still in outline. Unfilled. "Isabella," he whispered, taking the drawing with trembling hands. "What do these crosses mean?" The girl looked at her father with that disturbing maturity she had assumed since her recovery. "They're the people the buffalo needed to take in exchange. The black ones are already gone, the white ones are still to come." Andrea approached alarmed. "What are you talking about?" Jason quickly hid the drawing. "Nothing important, honey. Just a story I was telling her." But Isabella wouldn't allow the omission. "Mommy, I know why I'm better. The buffalo is trading. My life for others, and Daddy's too." Andrea paled. "What nonsense is this, sweetheart? You got better because the doctors took good care of you, and—" "No, Mommy," interrupted Isabella with serenity. "It was the doctors who got worse. They couldn't cure me, the buffalo could, but he needs to maintain balance. It's like in Great-Grandma Hope's stories." Andrea shot an accusing look at Jason. "Have you been telling her these legends?" "Never," Jason defended himself. "She simply knows." Before the discussion could continue, Laura entered the room accompanied by Dr. Davis. Both seemed tense. "Sorry to interrupt," said Gabriel, "but we need to talk urgently." "It happened again, didn't it?" asked Isabella before any adult could. "Speak. Who was it this time?" A heavy silence confirmed the child's terrible perception. Gabriel finally answered, "Valentina Morris, 8 years old, leukemia in remission. She was about to be discharged when she suffered an inexplicable cardiac arrest 20 minutes ago." "My God," murmured Andrea, covering her mouth with her hands. "The situation is out of control," continued Gabriel. "If the pattern holds, we'll lose 5 more patients in the coming days. The balance demanded by the guardian seems disproportionate." "It's not disproportionate," contested Isabella. "It's mathematical. 1 life is worth several when it's saved outside of time." The girl turned to her father. "You know what we need to do, Daddy? The buffalo showed me." The dawn stretched its mantle over St. John's Mercy Hospital when Jason Sanders, contrary to all medical recommendations, left his bed in the recovery ward. With uncertain steps, supported by an improvised cane, he headed to the hospital's inner courtyard, a small oasis of green surrounded by the 4 blocks of the building. The New Orleans sky displayed an almost perfect full moon, illuminating the garden with an almost supernatural clarity. Sitting on a stone bench, Jason waited. "I know you can hear me," he murmured into the void. "I know you're here. You've always been." Silence was his only response for long minutes. Then, an unexpected breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, despite the night being completely calm. The air became denser, colder, and Jason knew he was no longer alone. At the opposite end of the garden, The imposing figure of the white buffalo slowly materialized, as if emerging from the moonlight itself. Its deep blue eyes fixed on Jason, who felt a mixture of reverence and terror. "You're charging too high a price," said Jason with a choked voice. "Innocent people are suffering." The buffalo approached slowly. When it was a few meters from Jason, a voice emerged, not audible to the ears but resonating directly in his mind. "Balance does not judge innocence or guilt, it only balances." Jason swallowed hard. "My daughter says you have a plan, that there is a solution. What is it?" "The child understands better than you," replied the buffalo's mental voice. "She does not fear the balance." "What do you need?" "Take me in her place. That's what I asked when I was in a coma." The buffalo shook, its majestic head. 2 lives were saved when they should have followed their course. The compensation is already underway. "But their children, people who were getting better," protested Jason with tears streaming down his face. "Life does not differentiate ages or stages." The buffalo came closer, its warm breath forming, small clouds in the night air. "There is only one way to interrupt the compensation." "What?" "Tell me, I'll do anything." "A voluntary sacrifice, a conscious balance." Before Jason could respond, a female voice called his name. Laura appeared in the garden, wrapped in her white coat. "Mr. Sanders, what are you doing out here at this hour?" She stopped abruptly when she noticed the white buffalo. "My God, it's real." "You can see it?" asked Jason, surprised. "Of course I can. It's huge and right in front of you," she replied, approaching cautiously. "Isabella said I was special, that the buffalo had chosen me to help." The buffalo turned to Laura, its blue eyes shining with hypnotic intensity. "Is it speaking to you, too?" asked Jason. Laura nodded slowly, her face registering amazement and understanding. "It's showing me images, ancient stories, your family, Mr. Sanders, and the patience that—" She hesitated. "That it took in exchange for our lives," completed Jason bitterly. "It's not that simple," replied Laura, still mentally connected with the Guardian. "It doesn't take anyone. It merely restores the natural flow that was interrupted when you two were saved." "And what's the solution that Isabella mentioned? What does it want from us?" Laura closed her eyes, as if processing complex information. "A ritual. Her symbolic gesture of return that satisfies the balance without requiring more lives." "What ritual?" asked Jason, grasping at this hope. At this moment, a third voice joined the conversation. Dr. Davis walked through the garden, carrying an old book. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I felt I should be here." "You can see it too?" asked Laura, pointing to the buffalo. Gabriel respectfully inclined his head toward the animal. "Not with common eyes, but I can sense its presence. After 50 years studying the mysteries between life and death, I've developed a certain sensitivity." He opened the book to a marked page. "I found records of a ceremony performed by the ancestors of the Sanders family in 1897 when they faced a similar situation. A ritual of gratitude and renunciation." "How does it work?" asked Jason anxiously. "According to the accounts, the family gathered at the place where the Guardian first appeared. They brought significant personal objects and offered them symbolically, renouncing something precious in exchange for the gift of life. More importantly, the person saved needed to accept that their recovery was temporary, a loan, not a right." Laura, who still maintained the silent connection with the buffalo, nodded slowly. "It confirms the balance can be satisfied with sincere renunciation, but—" "But what?" pressed Jason. "Isadora will have to participate and accept the consequences." "Isabella," Jason corrected automatically. "No," replied Laura with her eyes still closed. "It calls her Isadora, says this is her original name from many lives ago when the pact with the Guardian was established." Gabriel consulted his book again. "Interesting. In the 1897 case, the saved child also had a different spiritual name that only the Guardian knew." "This is madness," murmured Jason, running a hand through his hair. "How can I involve my 6-year-old daughter in an ancestral ritual?" "She's already involved, Mr. Sanders," replied Gabriel gently. from the moment the Guardian chose her. The question now is, do we perform the ritual to stop the loss of other lives, or do we let the balance follow its natural course? At this moment, Jason looked at the buffalo, which remained motionless, its blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. And if the ritual doesn't work? The buffalo moved for the first time, inclining its majestic head toward the hospital. The three humans followed its gaze and saw through the illuminated windows the small silhouette of Isabella, standing in the pediatric corridor observing them. "She knew we would be here," whispered Laura. "She always knew." "We have until dawn to decide," announced Gabriel, closing his book. "The ritual must be performed at the first ray of sunlight according to the records." When they turned their gaze back to the buffalo, it had disappeared, leaving only the subtle perfume of wildflowers in the night air. "I'm going to talk to my wife," decided Jason, standing up with difficulty. "She needs to know what's happening." "And I'll prepare what's necessary for the ritual," offered Gabriel. "I need something that belonged to the Sanders ancestors, if possible." "My grandmother left a medallion," remembered Jason. "Andrea has it." As they walked back to the hospital, the three shared the uncomfortable sensation of being observed from all sides, not just by Isabella in the window, but by invisible presences that seemed to fill the now silent garden. The news of the conversation in the garden fell like a bomb on Andrea. Her world, already shaken by recent events, seemed to completely crumble before the revelations of Jason, Laura, and Dr. Davis. "Do you really expect me to believe this?" she questioned, walking nervously around Isabella's room, who slept serenely. "Ancestral rituals, a spiritual buffalo that decides who lives and who departs. This is madness." "I would also resist believing if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes," confessed Laura. "But then explain how your daughter, terminal 3 days ago, now sleeps as if she had never been ill." "Medicine has limitations, unexplained cases," Andrea began. "And coincidences?" interrupted Dr. Davis. 8 patients suddenly worsened. Since Isabella and Jason began to recover, some have passed, others fight for their lives, all were stable or in recovery. Andrea sat down, exhausted. As a university biology professor, her scientific mind refused to accept supernatural explanations. However, looking at her sleeping daughter, she couldn't deny the miracle she had witnessed. "Even if I considered this impossibility," she finally said, "I wouldn't allow my daughter to participate in a pagan ritual." "It's not pagan," corrected Gabriel, leafing through his old book. "Actually, it's a syncretic ceremony, mixing Native American and Catholic elements. Jason's ancestors adapted the original traditions when they converted to Catholicism in the 18th century. Andrea looked at her husband, seeking confirmation. Jason nodded slowly. "My grandmother was very Catholic, but maintained certain ancient traditions. The medallion she left me has the image of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception on one side and Native American symbols on the other." "The medallion," murmured Andrea. "Is that why you wore it during Isabella's chemotherapy?" "Yes, it was a way of asking for protection. I never imagined that." Jason hesitated, looking at his sleeping daughter. "I never thought the Guardian would actually respond." A heavy silence settled in the room, interrupted only by Isabella's soft snoring and the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. "If we don't perform the ritual," Andrea finally asked, "what will happen?" Gabriel and Laura exchanged apprehensive looks. It was Jason who answered, "More people will depart. The buffalo will continue charging the price for our miracle." "Until when?" "Until the balance is restored," replied Gabriel. "According to my studies, proportionally to the extra lifetime granted. And with the ritual, what happens?" "The balance is symbolically satisfied," explained Gabriel. "The Guardian accepts the offering instead of more lives." Andrea analyzed the expressions of the three. There was something they weren't telling her. "What's the real price of this ritual? What are you hiding from me?" Again, silence. This time, denser, more distressing. "Jason?" Andrea pressed. Her husband took a deep breath. "According to the Guardian, through Laura, the ritual stops the departures of other patients, but Isabella and I will lose the gifts we received. What does that mean exactly? We don't know for certain, admitted Gabriel. In the historical records, the child from 1897 remained alive, but never fully recovered her health. She lived until the age of 40 with physical limitations. Andrea covered her face with her hands. So the choice is, let innocent people depart, or return my daughter and husband to states of permanent fragility. It's not an easy choice, agreed Gabriel, but it's the only one we have. At this moment, Isabella opened her eyes. Her gaze, serene and deep, scanned the adults until fixing on her mother. Don't be afraid, Mommy, she said with a clear voice. The buffalo doesn't want to hurt anyone. He just needs to maintain balance. Do you understand what's happening, sweetheart? Asked Andrea, approaching the bed. Yes, much better than you, replied Isabella with a tranquil smile. The guardian showed me everything while I slept. He showed our family from the beginning when we made the promise. What promise? Asked Jason, intrigued. A long time ago, when America didn't even exist yet, our family lived in a village near the sea. There was a great sickness and almost everyone died. Our ancestor, the tribe's healer, made a pact with the spirit of balance. If he saved the children of the village, our family would serve as his messengers forever. The adults exchanged astonished looks. The historical precision and sophisticated language completely contrasted with a 6-year-old child. How do you know this, Isabella? Asked Dr. Davis, approaching. Isadora, corrected the girl. That was my name back then. I was the healer's daughter. A shiver ran down the spine of everyone present. Jason squeezed his wife's hand, who seemed about to collapse. Are you saying you remember past lives? Asked Andrea with a trembling voice. Not exactly, replied Isadora. The guardian showed me. It's different. Like watching a movie where you are, but it's not really you. She turned to Gabriel. You were there too, you know? You were the shaman from the neighboring village. That's why you can sense the guardian. Now. Gabriel visibly paled. I've always had an affinity for unexplained phenomena, since childhood. And Laura too, continued Isabella. She was the healer's sister, the aunt who took care of me while Mommy saved the others. Laura felt her legs weakened and needed to sit down. That would explain why I can see and hear him so clearly. We're all part of the same circle, concluded Isabella with disturbing wisdom. The guardian has brought us together again because the balance is more disturbed than ever. Why? Asked Jason. Because he saved 2 lives at the same time, you and me. This has never happened before in our lineage. A sharp beep from another child's monitor erupted down the corridor. Alarmed voices and hurried steps indicated another emergency in progress. We don't have much time, warned Isabella, suddenly urgent. The ritual needs to be done before dawn or more people will depart. Andrea looked at her husband, at the doctor, at the nurse, and finally at her daughter, who somehow seemed simultaneously an innocent child and an ancient soul. The decision weighed on her shoulders like never before. What do we need to do? She finally asked. Isabella smiled with genuine relief. We need great-grandma's medallion, seawater, white flowers, and we have to go to the place where the guardian first appeared. The inner courtyard, concluded Laura. No, corrected Isabella, the first place he appeared in this cycle, the site of Daddy's accident. All eyes turned to Jason. Audubon Park, he said, understanding. Where I fell from the horse, that's where it all began this time. Will we get authorization to leave the hospital in the middle of the night? Questioned Andrea. Dr. Davis straightened up, assuming a posture of authority. Leave that to me. As chief physician, I can authorize experimental procedures in extraordinary cases, and this is certainly the most extraordinary case of my career. The night air of New Orleans embraced the small group, disembarking at Audubon Park. The sky, punctuated by stars and dominated by the full moon, seemed closer, more attentive to what was about to happen. Dr. Coleman, who initially resisted this collective superstition, as he called it, decided to join the expedition at the last moment, more to monitor the patients than because he believed in the ritual. I still can't believe I agreed to this, he murmured to Laura while helping Jason descend from the hospital van. 3 days ago, you also wouldn't have believed in Isabella's miraculous recovery, she replied, adjusting the small emergency medical kit she had brought as a precaution. Isabella, wrapped in a light blanket, looked at the park with eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical landscape. In her small arms, she carried a bouquet of white flowers, lilies, jasmines, and roses, picked from the hospital garden itself. "It's here," announced Jason, pointing to a grassy stretch near an ancient oak. "This is where the horse got spooked and threw me." Dr. Davis consulted his watch. "We have just over an hour until dawn. We need to prepare." Following the doctor's instructions, based on his studies and complemented by Isabella's guidance, the group formed a small circle. At the indicated spot, Andrea took from her bag a small bottle containing seawater, hastily collected by a hospital security guard who lived near the beach. "What do we do now?" she asked, still visibly uncomfortable with the whole situation. It was Isabella who answered, with that serene and ancient voice she assumed in crucial moments. "Now we wait for the Guardian. He will come when he's ready." While they waited, Dr. Davis and Jason arranged small white candles around the circle, creating a luminous perimeter. Laura helped Isabella arrange the flowers in the center of the formation. "Are you sure about this?" whispered Andrea to her daughter, taking advantage of a moment alone. "We don't have to do this if you don't want to." Isabella looked at her mother with a mixture of childish tenderness and adult understanding. "I want to, Mommy. It's the right thing to do. Other people shouldn't depart because of us." "But if the ritual works, you might get sick again," insisted Andrea with tears in her eyes. "Maybe," admitted Isabella, "but even so, I'll have more time than I should. The Guardian is fair." Before Andrea could respond, a sudden wind swept through the circle, extinguishing 3 of the candles and making the leaves of nearby trees murmur as if in conversation. Everyone turned to the north side of the park, from where the wind came. There, emerging from the darkness as if materializing from the night itself, the white buffalo approached in slow and majestic steps. Dr. Coleman, who until then had maintained a skeptical expression, visibly paled. "My God," he murmured, "it's real." "Welcome to my reality of the last few days," commented Laura, positioning herself near Isabella. The buffalo entered the circle and stopped in the center, among the arranged flowers. Its blue eyes scanned each of those present, lingering longer on Isabella and Jason. Without any visible movement of its mouth, everyone heard a deep and resonant voice in their minds. "The circle is complete. The ancients have returned." Isabella stepped forward, holding her great-grandmother's medallion. "We are here to restore the balance, Guardian, to honor the ancestral pact." "The child speaks with the voice of the ancients," replied the buffalo mentally. "Isadora resurges in times of imbalance, as it has always been." Dr. Davis, who mentally recorded everything for his studies, couldn't contain his curiosity. "Why did you choose the form of a white buffalo in this cycle, Guardian? Each era has its symbols of power and wisdom. The buffalo represents strength and sacrifice in the current understanding. Before it was the mountain lion, before that the eagle, and in the beginning, the great fish of the depths." "How do we restore the balance?" asked Jason, stepping forward. The buffalo inclined its head toward the flowers and seawater. "The elements are present. Only the sincere offering is missing." Jason looked at Gabriel, confused. "What offering?" "The medallion. It's not a material object that the Guardian desires," explained Isabella, with wisdom beyond her years. "It's an offering of life." "I don't understand," intervened Andrea, alarmed. "You said no one else would need to depart." "And they won't," guaranteed Isabella. "The offering is not life itself, but how we live it." She turned to her father. "Daddy, you need to renounce horseback riding. That's what brought the imbalance this time. The accident wasn't chance, it was a warning ignored." Jason seemed genuinely surprised. "Renounce equestrianism? It's my profession, my passion since childhood." "It's also what almost took your life and triggered this whole cycle," replied Isabella. Then, turning to her mother, she added, "And you, Mommy, need to leave the university and dedicate yourself to the ancestral studies of our family." "Abandon my academic career?" protested Andrea. "This is absurd. I'm a scientist, not a healer." "We've always been both," insisted Isabella. "First you attend que somos damas que danza." Scientific knowledge and ancestral knowledge should complement each other, not oppose each other. This is the greater balance that our family has forgotten for generations. The buffalo moved in the circle, creating patterns with its hooves on the ground. Where it stepped, small white flowers instantly sprouted from the soil, forming a complex design. "The pattern is incomplete," said the guardian in their minds. "Isadora's own offering is missing." All eyes turned to the girl. Andrea took a protective step toward her daughter. "She's just a child. She's already been through too much suffering." "It's okay, Mummy," reassured Isabella. "I already know what my part in the agreement is." With surprising calmness, she walked to the center of the circle and placed her hand on the white buffalo's forehead. "I offer my awakened consciousness." "What does that mean?" asked Jason, alarmed. It was Dr. Davis who answered, suddenly understanding. "She's offering her current connection to ancestral memories, isn't she? The wisdom that the guardian granted her during the healing." Isabella nodded. "First you attend que somos damas que danza." I'll go back to being just a normal child, without memories of Isadora or our family's history. "But does this mean we'll forget all this?" questioned Andrea, indicating the circle, the ritual, the buffalo itself. "We'll return to ignorance about our legacy." "You will remember," replied the guardian in their minds. "You will be the new guardians of the tradition until Isadora returns again." "And the other patients in the hospital?" asked Dr. Coleman, intervening for the first time. "Will the balance be restored for everyone?" "The cycle of compensation will be interrupted," confirmed the buffalo. "But what has already been taken remains on the other side. What was granted will partially return to the natural flow." "In plain English," translated Laura, "Isabella and Jason will survive, but they'll go back to facing part of their health problems." "Not everything is lost," added the guardian. "Scientific knowledge combined with ancestral knowledge offers new paths of healing. This is the true purpose of bringing together the ancient circle in a modern hospital." With these words, the buffalo leaned over Isabella. The girl, without fear, embraced the immense neck of the mystical animal. A soft light emanated from the point of contact, enveloping both in a silvery glow. "It's beginning," murmured Dr. Davis. "The ritual of balance." The sky on the horizon began to brighten with the first signs of dawn, marking the precise moment for the ancestral ceremony that could save lives, at a price that only time would reveal. 3 weeks passed since the ceremony at Audubon Park. St. John's Mercy Hospital gradually resumed its routine, although something subtle had changed in its corridors. Nurses and doctors commented on a feeling of peace that seemed to have established itself, especially in the pediatric ward. In the inner courtyard, Laura observed the New Orleans sky. White clouds paraded against the intense blue, occasionally obscuring the afternoon sun. Her shift had ended, but she was in no hurry to leave. Since the ritual, she felt a special connection with the hospital, as if invisible threads of energy kept her connected to the place. "Thinking about the buffalo?" Dr. Davis's voice pulled her from her reverie. The senior doctor brought 2 cups of coffee, offering one to the nurse. "Among other things," she replied, accepting the drink. "I'm trying to organize my thoughts for the journal we're writing." After the ritual, Gabriel had invited Laura to document the extraordinary events in a detailed record, something between a scientific study and a spiritual diary. The Hias' idea was to preserve the knowledge for future generations, especially for the Sanders family. "How is Isabella today?" asked Gabriel, sitting on the bench beside her. "Stable," replied Laura with a sigh. The symptoms returned, as the guardian predicted, but with less intensity. Dr. Coleman is optimistic about the new treatment. As promised by the white buffalo, the ritual had interrupted the cycle of deterioration of the other patients. All who were still fighting stabilized that same dawn, and no other inexplicable case had occurred since then. However, the price was equally fulfilled. Both Isabella and Jason returned to presenting part of their original health problems. For Jason, It meant muscle weakness and occasional episodes of mental confusion, sequelae from the traumatic brain injury he suffered in the fall. For Isabella, the mysterious disease had returned, albeit in a milder form and unexpectedly more responsive to conventional treatments. "Andrea brought something interesting today," commented Gabriel, pulling a faded green-covered notebook from his folder. "Jason's grandmother's diary. She found it in an old box in the family attic. Hope, the Native American descendant?" "Exactly. And guess what we found?" Gabriel carefully opened the notebook to a marked page. Formulas. Medicinal recipes based on native plants, with precise annotations about dosages and preparations. And this would help Isabella. "Andrea has already tested some compounds in the university laboratory. 3 of them have properties that could complement Isabella's current treatment." He smiled at Laura's surprised expression. "It seems the Guardian was right. Scientific and ancestral knowledge can work together." Laura sipped her coffee, thoughtful. Andrea has changed so much since the ritual, from staunch skeptic to traditional medicine researcher. "Experience transforms people," Gabriel philosophized. "And speaking of transformation, have you noticed that Isabella doesn't remember anything about being Isadora or about the white buffalo?" "Yes, as she predicted during the ritual. She went back to being just a 6-year-old child, without ancestral memories or mystical wisdom," Laura smiled. "Yesterday she asked me if unicorns are real with all the innocence in the world. And what did you answer? That some extraordinary things can exist, even when we can't see them every day." The doctor nodded, approving the response. Both remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the garden, which, after the ritual, seemed more alive, more vibrant in its colors and aromas. "We received the results of Isabella's latest tests," commented Gabriel, changing the subject. "Alexander is cautiously optimistic. The combination of conventional treatment with the extract that Andrea developed seems to be working." "I know it's too early to celebrate, but it's already a victory," agreed Laura. "And Jason? Has he decided about the proposal?" Dr. Coleman had offered Jason a position at the hospital as an occupational therapist for children in recovery. It would be a way to keep his promise to abandon horseback riding while using his experience with horses in a therapeutic manner. He accepted. "This morning," replied Gabriel with a smile. "He'll start working with our young patients as soon as he's discharged. Hippotherapy is a promising field, and having someone like him on the team will be valuable." Laura smiled, satisfied. Life was finding new paths, even after such extraordinary events. The rhythm of the hospital resumed its normalcy, but a different normalcy, more aware of the mystery that lives between the boundaries of science and spirituality. "Speaking of Alexander," continued Gabriel, checking his watch, "he wants to meet us to discuss an interesting new case. An elderly lady who arrived yesterday reporting recurring dreams of a white animal that visits her during the night." Laura straightened up, suddenly alert. "Do you think—" "Probably a coincidence," replied Gabriel, although his tone suggested otherwise. "But since that night in the park, I've learned not to dismiss possibilities so quickly." As they walked back to the hospital, Laura felt a gentle wind caress her face, an almost deliberate touch, like a silent whisper. Involuntarily, she looked back at the empty garden. For a brief instant, she had the impression of seeing a white reflection among the foliage, but when she blinked, there was only the natural movement of plants under the afternoon breeze. "Did you feel that?" she asked Gabriel. "What?" "I don't know exactly. A presence." The doctor smiled enigmatically. "The Guardian never really leaves, Laura. It just changes form, waiting for the moment when it will be needed again." As they entered the hospital, the light of the setting sun filtered through the windows, creating golden patterns on the floor. In the pediatric ward, children laughed while watching a puppet show organized by volunteers. Among them, seated in a wheelchair, Isabella watched the spectacle with bright and innocent eyes, eyes of a normal child, without the weight of ancestral wisdom she had previously carried. "Sometimes I wonder," whispered Laura as they observed the scene from a distance, if we made the right choice that night. There is no right or wrong choice in situations like that, replied Gabriel. Only choices and their consequences. The important thing is that we honored the balance. In the pocket of her coat, Laura carried a small white feather she had found that morning on her chart, exactly as had happened with her predecessor, the nurse who witnessed the Guardian's appearance in 1897, according to the accounts Gabriel had discovered. Her small sign that the extraordinary remained intertwined with the everyday, visible only to those who knew where to look. Time flowed in a peculiar way at St. John's Mercy Hospital since the events with the white buffalo. For some, like Dr. Coleman, the days passed in a regular way, filled with medical routine and clinical cases that demanded his attention. For others, like Laura and Dr. Davis, the moment seemed loaded with hidden meanings, as if each shadow could hide a secret, each breeze could carry a message. 6 months had passed since the ritual at Audubon Park. Fall had arrived in New Orleans, bringing milder days and fragrant nights. On the porch of her newly acquired house near the hospital, Andrea leaned over a microscope, meticulously analyzing samples of a native plant from the region. "Still working?" asked Jason, approaching with 2 cups of tea. Despite the cane he still needed for long walks, his recovery was progressing well. "I'm almost finishing," she replied, accepting the hot drink. "This extract is showing promising results for cases like Isabella's." Andrea's transformation had surprised everyone. The renowned cellular biologist, previously dedicated exclusively to conventional science, had passionately plunged into the study of medicinal ethnobotany, combining her academic rigor with the ancestral knowledge of Jason's family. In 6 months, she had already developed 2 compounds that proved effective as complements to the traditional treatment of autoimmune diseases. "How is she tonight?" she asked, looking at the neighboring house where the light in Isabella's room was still on. "Reading that new book about constellations," replied Jason with a smile. "She says she wants to be an astronomer when she grows up." Both smiled, feeling the same mixture of relief and concern. Isabella's health had improved considerably with the combined treatment, but she still had bad days. Days when the mysterious disease manifested again, reminding everyone that balance demanded its constant price. The phone rang, interrupting the tranquil moment. It was Laura. "You need to come to the hospital," she said with an urgent voice. "Something happened that you should see." When the Sanders couple arrived at the hospital, they found Laura and Dr. Davis in the private meeting room with indecipherable expressions. On the table there was a very old book and some recent photographs. "What happened?" asked Andrea, alarmed. "Is it about Isabella?" "Not directly," replied Gabriel. "It's about this." He rotated one of the photographs so they could see. It was an image of the hospital's inner courtyard, apparently taken by a security camera. At first nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just the empty space under the nightlight. Then, looking more carefully, they noticed, at the edge of the garden, partially visible, was the unmistakable silhouette of a white buffalo. "When was this?" asked Jason, feeling his throat tighten. "Last night," replied Laura. "The security guard didn't see anything personally, but the camera recorded it." "Is he coming back?" questioned Andrea, divided between fear and fascination. "Does this mean something will happen to Isabella?" "Not necessarily," intervened Gabriel, adjusting his glasses. "Actually, we believe he never really left. He just became less visible." The doctor opened the old book to a marked page. It was a handwritten diary dated 1898, a year after the documented case of the Guardian's previous appearance. "This is the account of Father Anthony Vera, chaplain of the hospital at that time. He wrote that the child saved by the Guardian in 1897 continued seeing the white mountain lion regularly for the 7 years that followed, although no one else saw it. He interpreted this as a sign of continuous protection." "But Isabella hasn't mentioned seeing the buffalo again," observed Jason. "Maybe she sees it but doesn't understand the meaning," suggested Laura. "Remember that, as promised, she lost all memories related to Isadora and the ritual." "There's more," continued Gabriel, turning a few more pages of the diary. "The priest reports that, in the following years, Terminal patients frequently describe dreams with a white animal before departing peacefully. He began to interpret the guardian not just as a healer, but as a guide between worlds. A contemplative silence fell over the room. The idea that the white buffalo remained as a constant presence, invisible to most, but still active in the limits between life and death, was simultaneously comforting and unsettling. That would explain some recent events, commented Laura. In the last week, 3 elderly patients in palliative care reported similar dreams before departing peacefully. All mentioned a white animal that guided them through a flowery field. I don't understand, said Andrea, frowning. If the guardian continues here, why show himself on the cameras now? What's the message? Gabriel exchanged a significant look with Laura before answering. We believe it's a warning, not for Isabella but for the hospital as a whole. He then revealed the reason for the urgent call. The administrative board of St. John's Mercy Hospital had voted, the day before, for the demolition of the inner courtyard to construct a new advanced examination wing. The decision had been made over the objection of the medical team, purely for financial and spatial reasons. The garden has existed since the hospital's foundation in 1853, explained Gabriel. It's not just any green space. It's a sacred place for many traditions that have intertwined in the history of Louisiana. According to the records I found, the very ground where the hospital was built was considered a healing region by the original Native American peoples. You think the Guardian is manifesting to prevent the demolition of the garden? Asked Jason, incredulous. It seems unlikely, I know, admitted Gabriel. But the timing is too perfect to be a coincidence. The decision was made yesterday at 3 p.m. The image was captured at 11:45 p.m. Andrea, who had been absently leafing through the priest's diary, suddenly pointed to a passage. Look at this. In 1912, there was an attempt to convert the garden into a new infirmary. According to the priest, a series of inexplicable incidents forced the abandonment of the project. The 4 exchanged significant looks. The coincidence was too disturbing to be ignored. What can we do? Jason finally asked. We don't have the power to reverse a decision of the administrative board. It was Laura who had the idea that would change everything. Maybe we can't, but we know someone who can. The next morning, an unexpected visit interrupted the administrative board meeting. Samuel Montgomery, the most influential benefactor of the hospital and descendant of its founder, rarely appeared personally at the facilities. His presence, accompanied by Andrea Sanders, caused immediate commotion. I heard about the decision regarding the inner courtyard, he announced without preamble. I came to inform you that I don't support this change and, if necessary, will redirect my funds to other institutions that respect their historical heritage. The threat, polite but firm, had an immediate effect. While the board members tried to calm him, Andrea presented an alternative proposal, the construction of the new wing on an adjacent lot, recently made available by the city, thus preserving the historic garden. Dr. Sanders brought to my attention the cultural and historical importance of this space, continued Montgomery. As a descendant of the founder, I feel responsible for preserving not just the walls of this hospital, but its soul. What Montgomery didn't mention was the true reason for his sudden interest, the photograph of the white buffalo that Andrea had discreetly shown him, and the remarkable similarity to a mythical animal that, according to family stories, had saved his great-grandfather from a fatal fever in 1878. Some stories, like underground rivers, run invisible for generations, only to resurface when least expected, connecting people and events across time. Winter in New Orleans was mild compared to other regions of America, but it brought with it a special quality of light, golden and soft, that transformed the inner courtyard of St. John's Mercy Hospital into an almost magical setting during the late afternoon. It was exactly at this time, 1 year after the extraordinary events involving the white buffalo, that a small group gathered for a discreet ceremony. A new stone marker had been installed in the center of the garden with a simple plaque that read, "In honor of the visible and invisible guardians of this hospital, 1853-2025. The initial date marked the foundation of the hospital, the final one, the present moment, which somehow seemed to connect to all the past. Isabella, now 7 years old, ran among the newly planted flowers, apparently oblivious to the profound significance of the gathering. Her body, although still marked by the disease that periodically manifested, demonstrated surprising vitality. The treatments developed by Andrea, combining scientific and ancestral knowledge, had stabilized her condition, allowing her to live an almost normal childhood. "She really doesn't remember anything?" asked Dr. Coleman to Laura, observing the girl from a distance. "Nothing conscious," replied the nurse, "but sometimes she says things, draws things, that seem like echoes of those days. Last week I found her drawing a white buffalo, but when I asked what it was, she said it was a dream friend." The ceremony brought together the main people involved in the extraordinary events: the Sanders family, Dr. Davis, Laura, Dr. Coleman, and a few employees who had witnessed manifestations of the Guardian throughout that year. Also present were Samuel Montgomery and his wife Teresa, who, after learning the complete story, became fervent supporters of the garden's preservation. In fact, the Montgomery couple had gone further. They created a foundation dedicated to preserving traditional healing knowledge, funding research like Andrea's that sought bridges between modern medicine and ancestral wisdom. The foundation's first major project had been precisely the revitalization of the garden, transforming it into a therapeutic space with carefully selected medicinal plants. Dr. Davis, now with completely white hair but still showing remarkable vigor for his 66 years, took the floor, holding the book that documented his discoveries about the Guardian over the past year. "We are here to honor not only the extraordinary events we witnessed, but the entire history of this sacred place of healing," he began. "Throughout this year, we have documented 9 appearances of the Guardian, 7 in dreams of patients who were about to depart, and 2 physical manifestations captured by the cameras at crucial moments for the hospital." He made a significant pause before continuing. "What we have learned is that the Guardian of Balance is not just a being of emergencies and critical moments. He has always been here, part of the invisible fabric that sustains this hospital, this place of transition between suffering and relief, between departing and remaining." Jason, who now officially worked as an occupational therapist at the hospital, stepped forward. In his hands he held his grandmother Hope's medallion, the same one that had been used in the ritual. "My family carried the knowledge of the Guardian for generations, although we drifted away from it over time. What we lived through taught us that balance is not something we implore only in moments of despair, but something we honor daily in our choices." Andrea joined her husband, bringing a small pot containing a seedling with white flowers. Rare species she had rediscovered through Hope's diaries, whose medicinal properties were at the center of her most recent research. "Science and tradition are not opposites, but complementary," she declared, placing the plant next to the stone marker. "Both seek to understand the mystery of life, just through different languages." One by one, those present added their own symbols to the small improvised altar. Laura deposited the white feather she had found months before. Dr. Coleman, initially the most skeptical of the group, brought an antique stethoscope that had belonged to his grandfather. The Montgomery couple offered a small silver replica of the original 1853 hospital. While the adults performed their ritual, Isabella continued playing among the flowers, occasionally stopping to observe the ceremony with curiosity. At a particularly significant moment, when the setting sun cast golden rays through the trees, she abruptly stopped and looked at a specific point in the garden where only grass and shrubs were visible. "Mommy," she called, pointing. "Do you see the big horse?" Andrea and Jason exchanged looks of surprise. "There are no horses here, sweetheart," replied her mother delicately. "It's not a common horse," insisted Isabella with childish naturalness. "It's all white and has blue eyes. It looks more like a buffalo, actually." A collective shiver ran through the group of adults. Dr. Davis was the first to recover from the astonishment. "Have you seen it before, Isabella?" he asked gently. "Of course," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He's always here." Sometimes I play with him in my dreams. He said he takes care of us." A reverent silence followed the child's words. Without realizing the impact she had caused, Isabella went back to running among the flowers, chasing imaginary butterflies, or perhaps real ones, visible only to eyes that still viewed the world with the innocence of wonder. It was Dr. Coleman who finally broke the silence with a question directed to Gabriel. "Do you think she really sees it, that it's here now?" The senior doctor smiled serenely. "I believe it always has been. The question isn't whether it's here. It's whether we have eyes to see." At this moment, a gentle and inexplicable wind swept through the garden, stirring the leaves and scattering white petals in a perfect circular pattern around the stone marker. That wasn't a dramatic manifestation like the previous ones, but a subtle sign, like a nod of recognition, a whisper from the invisible to the visible. Years would pass. Children would be born and grow up. Patients would come and go. Doctors and nurses would dedicate their lives to the hospital and eventually retire. Time, relentless and unstoppable, would follow its course. Dr. Davis would eventually become director of the hospital before retiring to dedicate himself fully to his studies on unexplained phenomena in medicine. His book, Between Science and Mystery, Extraordinary Cases of Healing, would become a reference for open-minded doctors. Laura would take over as head of nursing for the pediatric ward, where she would implement integrative practices that combined traditional and alternative medicine. On Sundays, she would tell stories to the hospitalized children, tales where a large protective white animal frequently featured. Jason and Andrea would watch Isabella grow, not without challenges and relapses, but with an inner strength and wisdom that impressed everyone. At 16, she would decide to study medicine, inspired not only by her parents, but by an inexplicable vocation for caring that seemed to be born from the deepest part of her being. St. John's Mercy Hospital would become a reference in integrative treatments, attracting patients and researchers from across the country. The inner courtyard, now an extensive green area with hundreds of medicinal plants, would be considered a cultural heritage of the city, and on special nights, particularly those with a full moon, night shift employees would occasionally report glimpses of a large white figure silently crossing the corridors, always heading toward patients who needed special comfort or who were about to make the great transition. No one would fear these appearances anymore. On the contrary, they would come to be seen as signs of blessing, as confirmation that between the visible and the invisible, between science and mystery, between remaining and departing, there existed a guardian, not a supernatural being, to be feared or worshipped, but a manifestation of the very balance of life, a bridge between worlds that in the end might be just different faces of the same reality. In an interview given on her 100th birthday, Isabella Sanders, by then a renowned doctor and researcher, was asked if she believed in miracles. With a serene smile that carried echoes of that 6-year-old child who once conversed with a white buffalo, she answered, "I believe in balance, in life that renews itself through cycles of giving and receiving. If you want to call that a miracle, the true miracle isn't in the extraordinary moments of inexplicable healing, but in the invisible web that connects all lives, all times, all stories. We are all guardians of each other, even when we don't realize it." That same night, the security cameras of St. John's Mercy Hospital would capture, for a brief instant, the clear image of a majestic white buffalo standing beside the centenarian. Isabella, as if both were contemplating together the hospital that, like them, had traversed time, keeping alive the delicate balance between science and mystery, between life and continuity.